In this video, what we're going to do is introduce you to the concept of variables. We're going to make a few variables. I'm going to talk about various kinds of variables, and we're going to show you how they could be utilized in a Blueprint class to really be powerful in terms of manipulating different instances of classes within your scene to make it a lot more powerful and scalable as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get rid of this. This is from another video. And we're going to create the same thing really, but we're going to add a variable in instead. Okay, so I'm going to get our light component. We're going to add a delay. Okay, of 3 seconds. And then we're going to set the intensity of this light. So by default, a variable, or not by default, in general, a variable is a container that holds some data, okay? And that data could be a number. It could be kind of different kinds of number. It could be a whole number in terms of it doesn't have a decimal point, or it could be a number that does have a decimal point. We've kind of covered floats before. It could be holding data, a reference to another object that might be in your scene. So whenever you create a class like we have here in terms of light, we can make a variable of that type as well. So variables can be multiple different things, but they're really powerful in that we can save data to them. At the minute, you know, we can't really change or save data into any of these nodes. We can manipulate them here, and I would call it like hard coding it. So once you press play, that's it. You know, you can never change the duration. You can never change this intensity. When you're playing the game, it is just hard coded in, and that's it. But if we kind of set these to variables, we can change the variables data during runtime or during gameplay, and we can manipulate, you know, set intensity or duration during runtime as well. So whenever you're doing the light switch or things like that there, we can kind of use variables for that. To make a variable, it's pretty simple. You just go down here to the variable section. You hit the plus key. It creates a variable based off the last one that you made, or a boolean by default. But we'll call this here one intensity, and we'll kind of go over the details panel about what's up here. Okay, so you can plus here, name it, and then the details panel, you can rename it if you wanted to. So the first few things that we really want to look at are the variable name, which we've done, and the variable type. So by default, this here one has been set to a boolean, and a boolean is a true or false, okay, value. If I hit compile, you can see that the default value for intensity is false because it hasn't been checked, and it's true because it has been. Okay, so that has two values that I can hold: a on or off, a true or false, or it's kind of like a 0 and 1. Now, if you want to find out information on how to use these variables, we can go down to these common variables section in the variable type Blueprint class that I made. This is just basically a showcase of some of the common variables that you can use. So we've got a boolean. It's kind of like a switch, so it stores a true or false data, and we'll kind of go over some of these nodes in a second. We've got a float that stores numbers with decimal points. And again, you can do arithmetic with them, a multiply, plus, divide, minus. We've got an integer, which is a whole number, doesn't have a decimal point. And again, we can do arithmetic with that. So we've got a string. It's a type of variable that holds text information. And then in a while, I'm going to go over what a rotator is, what a vector is, and what a transform is, because these are kind of variables that store other variables, which store other variables, and it's kind of like this Russian doll effect. What you'll notice as well is each variable type can only store one type of data. A boolean wouldn't be able to store numbers. A float wouldn't be able to store whole numbers. An integer wouldn't be able to store true or false data or decimal points. A string wouldn't be able to store anything but text information. So whenever you create a variable, you kind of have to be really intentional of what you're doing. If it's a true or false value that you want to store, if it's like a number, a type of number that you want to store, you can go in here to this variable type, and then you can choose whatever information that you want to store. Okay, so you can change the type of variable here. You can put a tooltip in as well. So for instance, I'll just go information. If I hover over this here, you can see it says information. So if you're working within a team and you had a variable that was named something, mightn't be completely clear of what it is or what it's used for, you can put a tooltip in here and somebody can just hover over it and it'll just show it. We've got this expose on spawn, okay, which means that whenever you spawn this in a level, we'll go through spawning in another lecture, another video, you can manipulate this value straight away. Okay, it exposes it on spawn. It's kind of hard to tell you what it is here without seeing node, but we will cover it. And then we can also make it private. So if we had another blueprint that was going to communicate with this here blueprint, you wouldn't be able to change this value. Okay, so maybe as again, if you're working in a team and you don't want anybody changing this variable, you can just make it private. Then another thing, if you're doing cinematics, you can expose it in the cinematics system. You can set up a category. So I'll just call this here one values, and you can see now that it's under the category values. You can put a slider range because this is a float. You can put a range in it. If that was a boolean, you can't. Okay, so you could say, you know, and I'll show you this when we make it public in a second. But yeah, you can put a slider range and a value range within it. So if I compile this here, again, you'll see intensity now has a default value. So we can make the default value for this 5, or we can make it 0, okay? And then if we drag this in, there's two things that we can do with a reference. We can either get the reference or we can set it. If we get it, it's just getting a reference to it like we did with the point light. We can plug that in. So this value is just going to be 0, okay? It's just going to work exactly the same. Let me delete that. So after 3 seconds, it will just turn off. So exactly the same. Another thing that we could do is we could pull this out and we can set it. So maybe what we want to do is at the very start, we're going to set this to like something really, really high. And it's going to store that now, okay? And it's going to wait for 3 seconds and it's going to set intensity with that value of like 5 million or whatever it is. So we can set values and then change them and then use them in our logic as well. So if I press play now, after 3 seconds, this will get really, really bright. I'm going to stand back. Oh my God. It's like super bright. So you can always set and get variables. So when you drag it in, getting it is just getting a reference to it. And setting it, we can actually set the value within it. Now, if I was to put this the other way, just to show you what way the logic's happening. If I was to set this, what is actually going to happen, because its default value is 0, it's going to delay, it's going to set this here using this value of 0, so it's going to disappear, and then it's going to set intensity to 5 million. But because we're not setting the intensity on the light any longer, this only happens once and that's it. This value will be 5 million, okay, but it's not actually setting the intensity of the light to 5 million. I'll kind of show you that as well. So yeah, it will go off. The value itself will be 5 million now, but the value of the light still stays at 0. So you'll see in this variables blueprint that we have, you know, a get and a set for each one. So you can get a boolean, set it, get a float, set it, get an integer, set it, get a string, set it, rotator, vector, and things like that. I've also got like commonly used nodes that might go along with this. So let me just get rid of this set one for now. If we made a new variable and we made it a boolean, we'll just say like working or something like that there. and we set the float value to Boolean, or variable type, sorry, to Boolean, and we set working to false, so it's not working. What we can do is we can get this new node called a branch, and this is a node that you're going to be using quite a bit. So this branch checks for the condition of a variable. At the minute it's hard coded in. It's kind of like me hard coding in a number here. I can hard code in a true or false. So true is ticked, false is not. If this gets executed and this is false, this here will play out, okay? If it gets executed and it's true, this here will play out. So what we could do is maybe duplicate what we have here. I'll go down to false. And what we'll do is we'll set our intensity. The good way of, like, you know, where you can get getter set here, if I drag this into an executable node, it knows that I want to make a set node, because the get node just has a get pin or a data pin and never has an executable pin. So what I'll do is I'll change this here one to, like, say, okay, we're going to switch this to like 1000, so we'll dim it. And this here one will set it like 9. So we're going to make it really high. So if this is true, it's going to dim it to 1000. If this is false, it's going to raise the intensity to 9 million or something like that. So let's set it to true here. Press play. So it'll dim. Okay, so it is there. It's just dimmed a bit. Or I can set it to false. Press play, and it's going to get bright, and we can see that happening as well in the execution line. So if I press play here, you can see it's going down through the false one, and the delay, it's kicking that off. Or if I set this to true, press play, you can see it's going through the true value. So that's hard coding it in, but then we also can use a variable here, okay, and plug that in. So we're just getting the reference to it and plugging that in, and by default it's false. So again, it's going to go really bright, or by default we can make it true and it will dim it. You might be thinking, well, what's the point in doing that? You know, you're just hard coding it in. Well, what I can also do is, you'll see there's these closed icons next to these. If I open these up, basically what it means is I can change the values of these in the level editor. So if I grab this light, oh, we've got two lights anyways, and you can see here, oh, you know what I'll do? I will change the category for this here to values as well. So you'll see that when I select my light class in a level, under values now, I've got intensity and I've got working, okay? So if I go to my light, I can delete these set nodes now, okay? So it's never going to set an intensity. It's just going to use whatever default values are in here. At the minute, they're both to 0. But what I can do is I can go in here and I can set the intensity to like 5 million, and I can also choose if it's on or off, okay? And then, or 5,000, and then this here one I'll leave at 0. So after 5 seconds, this one will stay on, this one won't, okay? So now I can actually go in and manipulate what happens in the code through a variable. And then when we come to communicate between blueprints, you can change the values of blueprints from other blueprints as well. So like a light switch would be able to change maybe even the intensity or something like that there of the values within here. There are other variables as well that we use. I'm not going to show you in this here blueprint, but we'll kind of go over them in this variable type. So there's a rotator, and this here basically holds information of rotation values, okay, on the X, Y, and Z. And these are called struct variables, okay? So these next three that I'm going to show you are all struct variables. And these variables kind of hold information on rotations, vectors are locations, and transforms are location, rotation, and scale. Okay, but what these variables are made up of are individual floats basically combined together. So remember I was saying that, you know, a variable only holds one type of data. In reality, that's still true, but these here variables are made up of multiple other variables, okay? So you can see that this set rotator node has an X float value, a Y float value, and a Z float value. And we can actually, you know, right click this and split the structure or the struct, and we get access to them as well individually if we wanted to. And we can do this in the get node as well, so this reference, so we can get the individual elements of that structure. And it's the same for a vector, it's just made up of different floats, and it's the same as this transform. The transform is actually made up of, you know, 9 different floats, and they're all in different categories for location, rotation, and scale. So they are. So overall, variables are basically containers where we can store data and we can manipulate data when the game is being played. The also good thing about variables is when we make them public, we can change the state and the data held within multiple instances of the same class. So if you've got a class of an object and you've got public variables attached to that, you can change what happens and how they basically work within your environment through these public variables. So variables are something that you're going to be using quite a bit, but just remember they just store a single value and you can change them when we're playing the game, okay? And as you go along, you'll start to kind of use different types of variables. As I said before, you know, we can once we make a class, that can also be stored as a variable. So for instance, I'll show you that quickly. Actually, we make a variable, we'll call this light, and we'll make the variable type light. And because there's different light components and stuff like that, we've got to make sure we're choosing the right one. But it's this here one, it's an object reference, okay? This here one is a component. But this here variable is a light variable, so it's the same as our class that we're working in here right now, but it's empty, okay? It doesn't actually know what light we're talking about, okay? It doesn't hold a value. If I compile this here, you can see, look, default value, it should be a light object, but we can't really select it. What you want to do is make that public, and then if I select this here, I can go, right, I'm going to choose this light, okay? So that variable now stores the information of this light. And what I could do is, let's see, I'll keep it on the true line. If we had this light, okay, we stored information in it, we can say destroy actor. So what will happen is this light will go through the true, so make sure it is true. And when it does go through the true, it's actually going to destroy this light. This light should be going to 5,000 and this light should be going to 0. They're both going to knock off. This one doesn't actually get knocked off, it gets destroyed. And the reason this one gets destroyed is because we made that light variable and then we've pinpointed, you know, this as being the object that we're storing, okay? We're storing that information here, and then we're saying destroy it, you know, just delete it from the level. Now this one does have the same variable, but you know, it's not attached to anything, so we might get an error just saying, hey, this contains nothing. You want to destroy it, but there's nothing contained in there. So we probably will get a bit of an error, okay, during it. So they should both switch off, but in reality, one has been deleted. When I press escape now, oh, I didn't get an error. I thought I would. Oh, you know what? I should have this as true and we'll get an error because it was going through the false one. Okay, press escape. You can see it comes up with an error saying, hey, access none trying to read property light. And if I go right to the end, it goes destroy actor. Brings me to the node and it's like, I try to access this, but there's nothing in this light. That's because we didn't set the value. On the other variables, it's very easy to set the value. You just hit compile and it gives you a default value. But if it's going to be an object variable, you kind of have to make it public and set it within the level, or use some logic to set it as well. But yeah, that's variables. Really, really powerful elements that you can use in blueprints. So kind of stay away now from using just set things. Like for this here one, duration, what we could do is right click this here, promote it to a variable. It's called duration for us. Compile it, default value set to 3. I could maybe set it to, I'll keep it at 3. Make it public. And I could say, you know what, I'm not going to have the destroy actor anymore, I'm just going to delete that. I could say this one is going to be set after a second, and that will go to 0 as well. This one will be after 2 seconds, it will go to 0. And what we can do is have this one set at 3 seconds, it will go to 0. This one at 4 seconds, it will go to 0. And this one at 5 seconds. So again, each of these lights using all the same logic. They're all going through the same working as well. So they're all going through the true. They're all going through here, just setting intensity. These are the same now anyways. I could probably just get rid of that. And what you'll notice is this one will turn off, this one will turn off, this one will turn off, this one will turn off. Because we're using a public variable, I can set the duration time. It's not hard coded in. So if I press play, second, 2, 3, 4, 5. So variables, pretty cool. You can make them down here, add a variable, or if you get a data pin, you can right click and promote it to a variable as well. And then in the variable section, you can also change what category it sits in. It just manages it better over here, and default values as well.